Today's video may contain subject matter that some viewers may find disturbing, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a true scary story you want to send my way, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And thank you. This happened to me over several years when I was a kid. I'll try to keep them in order the best that I can, but I'm also trying to list out some of the worst events that I can remember. I've told a few close friends and my spouse, but I won't be using real names because I don't want my experience to cause others to look for the house. It's really not worth the possible trauma, in my opinion. As a kid, my family lived in this old house. It was a single story with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a basement. It was my parents, myself, and my little sister. When we moved in, I was walking and talking on my own, so around 5 or 6, I believe, and my sister was still an infant. I remember when we moved in, I felt off, like something just didn't feel right. I always felt scared being in there, especially alone. I remember trying to explain it to my parents, but they told me it was just because it was a change and something different and that it would pass, and I would be happy about having more room, etc., etc. I tried to let it go, but that sense of fear never went away. It was always the worst at night, while I slept. I started seeing a dark figure standing in the corner of my room, and most nights I felt paralyzed with fear, and all I could do was cover my head, close my eyes, and hope that it went away. Sometimes, I would just be frustrated that I couldn't sleep with it, and it would whisper things like, "Go away," or "Leave me alone." At one point, I even threw my pillow at the corner, which seemed to make things worse, as I could see the whole room go pitch black. Like, it just shrouded me with its darkness. There was usually light coming in from my window from the moonlight, but when this happened, my eyes were wide open and I could not see anything. At the same time, I felt like I couldn't breathe, like I was choking. I managed to let out a scream, and the next thing I knew, my mom ran into the room, turning on the light. I sat up crying and screaming, and she comforted me. I told her what happened, and she told me it was probably a bad dream. I told her that it had happened for a few nights. She actually slept in my room with me that night. I actually fell asleep and stayed asleep after that. However, the shadows did not stop. I kept seeing them almost every night, but I stopped trying to anger them. Sometimes I would fall asleep in the living room or my sister's room, hoping they would let me sleep there or carry me to my room without waking me so I didn't notice it. When that wouldn't work, I would sleep with my light on so the darkness couldn't get me. However, I would wake up feeling like someone was watching me, and to my surprise, my light would be off, and I would see it in the corner. The part that I really hated was when it would attack me. I would have accidents. This happened for years, and I hated myself for it. It was embarrassing, and I hated that my mom would have to clean it up. I started doing my own laundry just so she didn't have to. My mom didn't really deny my claims, but she didn't support them either, for the longest time. My dad, however, always made sure to make me feel pathetic. He was verbally abusive to no end, but it was just to me. He wasn't like that to my sister, nor to my mom, unless she was trying to defend me. He told me I was far too old to be wetting the bed, to be afraid of the dark, things like that. So I did my best not to talk about those things around him. My mom and I seemed to have a code after some time to get around it. The thing is, my dad wasn't always like that. I remember before we moved there, and even when we first moved, he was very kind and supportive. I originally wanted to do everything with him, and it quickly flipped, and I became more and more distant with him, and I was attached at the hip to my mother. She just couldn't understand what I was going through, or at least maybe didn't want to admit it. As I got older, I tried living with it the best that I could. I would have things move around in my room. I could feel something tugging at my ankles or my hair when I slept. I could even feel a presence when I was taking a shower. But as soon as I left the house, I felt this huge weight lifted off of me. I loved school. I stayed there as much as I could because it was an escape from the house. I wasn't really into sports, but I even asked to be on the softball team just to be out of the house more, but my dad said no, because I wouldn't take it seriously and he didn't want to waste his money. So I did anything I could to stay out. I went everywhere I could with my mom, but as soon as I came home, it felt like a parent standing in the doorway, seething with anger towards you, and you just knew you were going to get an earful as soon as you went in. The basement was probably the worst place. I wouldn't go down there alone, and it was even a struggle to go down there with my mom. The first time I went down there was after I followed my mom. The basement was used mainly for storage. Thankfully, there was actually a laundry room upstairs with the hookups, and even a built-in ironing board, so there wasn't much of a reason for me to go to the basement anyways. So, she had to get something from down there, and after we came back up, I realized I had left a toy and wanted to go get it. I turned on the light, ran down the stairs, and as I started making my way back up the stairs, the light went out, causing me to trip on a stair and scream. For some reason, I was frozen in place and I didn't know what to do when I felt that presence again. I screamed again for my mother when I felt something pull me backwards, causing me to lose my balance and fall down the steps. And shortly after, the light came back on and my mom was running down the stairs. I just remember trembling and screaming to get me out, and my mom picked me up and brought me back upstairs. She finally got me to calm down, and I tried to explain to her what happened. She said I probably fell when the light went out, throwing my balance off, and that she would have my dad check out the light. That confirmed for me that she wasn't the one to turn it off either. I knew that it was that same dark figure. It was the same feeling I got when I went to bed, and I vowed to never go back down there alone, fearing it would do something worse to me. As I got older, I started getting more and more used to this presence. The accidents stopped occurring as well as the screaming, but it was traded for full sleep paralysis. I would see the figure, but I couldn't move or scream. I could only lay there and cry, hoping that it would go away. My sleep schedule was completely screwed. I eventually got a lamp that I kept on at all times, and when I would wake up to it being off, I would immediately try to turn it back on. Sometimes it worked, other times it wouldn't. I found myself falling asleep on the bus, going to and from school, sometimes in classes, and especially at lunch. Whenever I could, I would. And of course, if I was caught sleeping in class, my parents were informed and I would get another earful from my dad. So, I started hiding that as much as possible. When I was old enough, I even tried staying at my friends' houses as much as I could. To my surprise, I had a few friends stay over and each of them told me that my house was creepy and they felt like they were being watched the whole time. The ones that admitted to feeling that, I would spill everything to them. These were the friends that I have really bonded to because they believe me and what I went through. I even tried things on the religious side. I tried saying prayers as I slept. When I saw the figure, I slept with a crucifix under my pillow and above my door, and it really didn't seem to do a damn thing. One of the worst encounters for me caused me to move out. I was 15, about to turn 16, and was excited to make plans for my birthday party. My mom and I were making plans, and she was trying to involve my dad in it, but he had no interest in me. He would give a dismissive response, and would just turn up the TV if we got louder. I think my mom could tell that I was upset, and said we would talk more about it the next day, and got ready for bed. That night, I remember hearing my dad telling my sister goodnight, and that he loved her, and then he didn't say a damn thing to me. I went to bed in tears that night. I was upset and confused. Why didn't he seem to love me like her? I was angry. Why was she so special? I must have cried myself to sleep that evening because when I woke up, I was still wearing my jeans, but I could feel that presence again. This time, though, all I could feel was anger. It was heavy, like something was pressing on my chest, and hard. It almost took my breath away. It was intense enough that it made me pass out again. The next day, I woke up and felt physically ill. I went to the restroom when I started feeling dizzy and I got sick. I decided I would take a shower, hoping that it would make me feel better, but to my horror, as I undressed, I had bruises all over my chest. There was no way that I could have done it to myself. Yesterday morning, they weren't there. I didn't do anything throughout the day to cause them, and I went to bed rather quickly the night before. When I saw this, I screamed for my mom to show her. The look on her face scared me even more. The way that she gasped and had tears in her eyes told me all that I needed to know. I'd asked about moving many times while we lived there, and it was always the same. My mom had to say no, but my dad always refused, saying I can choose when I'm an adult and have my own place, and kept telling me how I was ungrateful. The experience caused me to really beg my mom to let me leave. Obviously, I couldn't exactly move out, but after many arguments, my dad let me move in with my grandparents. It was his parents, actually, but they were amazing people. I felt my grandpa was more fatherly than he was, and actually didn't understand why he became the person he did. No one ever understood it, or maybe they didn't want to believe it. Once I moved in with them, all of it stopped, of course. It didn't follow me there, and I was able to get a full night's sleep. I improved in school tremendously and was just in a much better place. However, anytime I went back, the presence was right there, nearly breathing down my neck, so I never stayed long. I also became a lot closer with my sister after I moved out. I learned that I didn't hate her, nor did I feel jealous of her. It was all my father, of course. She did finally confide in me that she was feeling the presence too, but it didn't seem to be nearly as strong as what I felt. When she told me this, I urged my mom to get them out of there. I was afraid that they could all end up the same way. It wasn't going to be easy, though, as it wasn't until my senior year that my mom finally gave my dad an ultimatum, which was the house or them. To my surprise, he actually chose to move. He claimed that it was because the maintenance and upkeep was getting too expensive since it was an old house. Whatever the reason was, I was just relieved. Over the next few years, I actually went through therapy because of the experiences and due to the relationships I had with my father. Not to mention that, after they moved out, my dad started changing again. He slowly started talking to me more about what was going on at school, what I was doing after I graduated, and he was even the one inviting me over for dinner instead of my mother. He even told me he was proud of me when I graduated. Now that I'm much older with a spouse and kid of my own, I started having flashbacks of these things as we signed the papers for our first home. My parents came over, and to my surprise, my dad admitted to feeling weird after we moved in there as well. He chalked it up to being upset and regretting his decision on the house, the feelings of being a disappointment, and my lack of approval upsetting and angering him more. He said he felt like he was changing but had no idea why. That was the first time I learned that after I moved out. He actually began taking antidepressants, and when they moved out, he stopped taking them and began feeling like himself again. I don't recommend this, though. Follow your doctor's directions, always. He still would never admit to feeling any presence in that place, though, but my mom and sister finally did. We all just joked that maybe the being didn't like women. My sister and spouse talked about looking up the house's history to see if something happened there, but to be completely honest, I don't want to know. I don't want it to be tied to something, risking that it might possibly follow us. And that is where I've left it. I begged my spouse not to look into it, and so far they've claimed they haven't. I just wish they would tear that house down already because it's just sitting there empty, waiting for some poor soul to walk in. Summer has always been my favorite season. I love the heat. I loved playing baseball with my friends, going swimming, hiking, camping, and just about anything that involved me being outdoors. It typically put me in a better mood no matter what I was doing, including work. Admittedly, I didn't have the best luck with jobs, though. I never seemed to hold one longer than a year, but it was always odd circumstances. One place had been shut down for code violations, but most of us lower-level employees saw it coming. A local business went under. I was laid off from one, and one I had to quit because the managers were very toxic and abusive. So, until I found a long-term job, I worked a lot of places and experienced even more. One summer, I got a job working at a local tourist attraction. It was at a popular park that had a long trail that could easily take you a few hours to go around the whole thing. You could also rent bikes to go around it, or even pay for a reserved shelter for celebrations. I worked at the front booth, which basically involved ringing people up that bought passes, bike rentals, or the random snacks and souvenirs that we sold. It was great, because I could take my breaks or lunch outside, or even stroll around at a discount on my days off. Hell, even when I was working, I would be standing outside, taking out the trash and such if there were no customers around. So, even though the atmosphere was great, people can still be crappy or just weird. I've had my share of those, but this one really messed me up, and I'm still trying to figure out how it's possible. So, we stopped the bike rentals around 6 because the park closed around 8 or 9 when it got dark. We didn't want to rent out bikes and then not be back before then. The park is still open in the meantime, but the people that are left there are usually the parties, or just people passing by wanting a quick trinket or restroom break before getting back on the road. One night, it was myself and another guy working that we'll call Steve. Steve was sweeping up the lobby so we could prepare to mop, and I had just walked out the trash from the restrooms. The sun was just starting to set, and it looked gorgeous. You could see the pink and orange colors in the sky with the silhouettes of the trees in front of it, and it was always one of my favorite sights to see. As I started walking back towards the building, I paused, watching the sky. I seemed to have zoned out because I didn't notice when a car pulled into the parking lot. It wasn't until I heard the door open, since it had a bell attached to it, that I came back to reality. I suppose I looked around and noticed the car in the driveway, and I could tell that there was someone in the driver's seat, but because of the glare, I couldn't make out anything about them. Not thinking it was important, I went back into the building thinking maybe it was Steve trying to see where I had gone. However, it wasn't Steve that I saw when I entered, but a kid. I will always remember because of the way he was dressed. He looked about 9 or 10, I think, and had on shorts that were blue with white stars on one pant leg, and the other had red and white stripes. Think like an American flag. He was also wearing a green tank top with a Minecraft creeper on it, and when he turned around, I noticed the face painting he had on, which looked like it was supposed to be a Spider-Man mask, but it wasn't done very well. I remembered this because I was thinking he must have come from a party or some kind of festival or fair, and was beginning to wonder if there was one going on nearby that I wasn't aware of. I loved going to our state fair, but that usually wasn't for a few months, around September. He was looking up at the shelf lined with the stuffed animals that were holding our state flag. As I approached him, that's when he turned around and I saw his face. I said hi and asked him if he wanted one of the bears, as the shelf was pretty tall and he smiled and nodded, pointing to the blue one. As I grabbed it for him, I asked if blue was his favorite color, and he said yes. He stood there for a few minutes talking to me about how he just came from a party with his mom, and he wanted to get something for his little sister since she was sick and couldn't go with them. He then told me details about the party, like the cakewalk and winning a donut, and that his mom had to use the restroom and just rambled on about whatever came to mind. While we were talking, or more so he was talking and I was listening, Steve walked out from one of the offices, saying my name and asking where I'd been. I explained that I had been standing there for some time and talking to this kid, as I motioned towards him. He looked over and they both made eye contact and smiled. Steve looked confused, but his only response after was asking me to take out the trash. Cue my turn to be confused, as I told him I already did, and that I started talking to the kid when I came back inside. He argued with me that I hadn't done it yet, so I walked away, leaving the kid to stare at the bears, and I followed him back to the restrooms. Color me surprised when I went back there, expecting to prove him wrong, and the trash cans were still full. I was confused. If I hadn't taken out the trash from the restrooms, what trash did I take out? I grabbed the bags and walked by the bins in the office, behind the register and by the doors, and they all had trash too. It was like it never happened. While walking towards the front, I saw the kid walk out of the lobby again by himself. I looked over at the bears to see if he took it, since neither of us were at the register at the time, but not only were there no missing bears, it was even back on the shelf, right where I had grabbed it from. I continued to walk out the door to see if they were leaving, kind of feeling bad that we may have ruined their chance of buying something, but to my surprise, the car was gone. I didn't see it on the road, pulling out, anywhere, which, again, I found odd because there was not enough time for them to get in and drive away. It was already a weird day, so I just continued my way to the dumpster to toss the bags. And no, there weren't any bags in the dumpster either. But, as I headed back into the building, that's when things got weird. I saw the exact same car pull up to the building. Thinking maybe they did want to buy something, or maybe they forgot something, I watched to see them get out. This time, I saw the boy get out of the rear driver's side with the same shorts, shirt, and face paint on. At the same time, a woman got out of the driver's seat, and that was it. I watched as they walked by me, smiled, and entered the building. I followed behind them, looking around the lobby for Steve, and I noticed the boy walk over to the bears, giving me this weird sensation of deja vu. As he stared up at them, I took a gamble and reached for the blue bear, and I asked if that was the one that he wanted. He nodded. I asked him if it was for his little sister, to which he responded yes. This time, he walked over to his mom, explained that he wanted to get it for her, and she agreed. I went around the counter to wait as they made their selections, when Steve came over and was talking to me about something. However, he trailed off as he saw the boy and the mom approach the counter. He greeted them, as I did, and as I was ringing them up, he asked them if they had ever been here before. And the mom said that this was their first time, and that they were in the state for a family reunion, but her daughter stayed at the hotel with her dad because she wasn't feeling well. After we rang them up, the mom used the restroom and they left again, and I watched them both get into the vehicle and drive off. I immediately turned to Steve and asked him what was wrong or what he saw, and he agreed that that was the same little boy that was just in here, but the parent was nowhere to be seen. That's when I explained to him that I had taken out the trash already, and how I knew about the car. He seemed like he wanted to believe me, but was still skeptical. What we did agree on was that there was no way we saw that kid arrive, leave, and come back within that time frame. Not to mention that I knew what the kid wanted and why. I still have no explanation for it, and that happened a few years ago. All I can think was that it was some kind of glitch and that the time frame started over. Maybe because the kid wasn't supposed to be alone? I don't know, and I don't think I'll ever know. I work as a caregiver in some of the neighboring cities that I live in. I'm an RN, but I really enjoy working with patients in their own homes. Most of the time, they're a lot nicer and personable with you, but that makes sense. Hospitals are cold and lonely, and you typically don't know many people there. It's not a place that someone would want to spend longer than, say, a normal appointment in, right? So, being able to make people comfortable at home while they heal or spend their last days means a lot to me. Now, some of the people I cared for lived in sketchy places, and even some of the people could be sketchy themselves, so I still had to be aware of my surroundings and keep myself safe, as well as my patients. I wanted to share one of my experiences with you, because I like how you mentioned these can be entertaining as well as educational, because even though you may have the best at heart, that doesn't mean that everyone else does. It was the beginning of spring of 2018. I was caring for a gentle old lady that I'll just call Mary. Mary had suffered a stroke and was going through PT in order to walk again. She was able to talk for the most part, and had control of her arm, but we were still working on walking and building up her strength again. I was there 4 to 5 times a week, and a PT nurse was there twice a week when I was to help me. Most days she was a trooper and was willing to put in the effort, but everyone does have their off days. It didn't happen often, so when it did, we tended to go a little easier on her. We may only go half the time or do something different, something that she wanted to do. On this specific day, Mary was feeling a little under the weather, so we didn't want to push her if she physically was not feeling well. I called the PT and told her to reschedule, and I went about my normal tasks in the meantime, such as delving out her medication in the daily containers, changing the bed sheets, doing laundry, running a bath for her, just things like that. Mary was sitting on the couch watching TV when I went to the window to open the curtain. As I did so, I saw someone standing on the other side of the street. Mary lived in a condo, but it was like a retirement home because it was just seniors that lived there, but they weren't considered assisted living. So, anyways, this man was a bit off-putting at first. You see, he wasn't some normally dressed guy. His face looked very pale, and he was wearing what looked like a very baggy white jumpsuit, and was holding a briefcase. He wasn't doing anything else, but just standing there and watching as the cars drove by. My first thought was, that's kinda weird. But I moved on with my schedule. After some time, I had forgotten all about this person. It wasn't until I was wrapping up for the day and heading out the door after a family member arrived that I was reminded of him. I walked to my car, which was facing right towards him, so I spotted him quickly. This time I watched him slowly turn his head in my direction and smile and wave. Now that I was a little closer, I could tell the jumpsuit that I saw was actually what looked like a really old clown costume. It was baggy, and it had buttons or a design going down the front center, and the sleeves were puffy. Again, I thought it was weird, maybe a little unsettling, but I was hopeful to keep the peace. I just waved back and quickly got in my car to leave. I was going to Mary's the following day, so as I pulled up, I noticed our clown guy was sitting on the bench on the same road as the condos. There was a single bench that had a sidewalk next to it that led to the front office doors. There was a tree next to the bench, as well as a small flower bed that was there as a type of memorial. The residents used it mostly, but you would occasionally see joggers or other people passing by using it, so it wasn't odd seeing him sit on it. It was odd seeing someone dressed like that and sitting there. I got out of my car, locked my door, and I headed towards Mary's condo trying to keep an eye on this guy as well. Unfortunately, he noticed me and immediately smiled and waved again. Instead of a full hand wave like he had done the last time, this one was a simple lift of the hand and wiggling his fingers. Almost in a flirtatious way, I suppose. It was odd. But this time I kind of just faked a smile and approached the door. When I heard the buzz, I entered the door and proceeded with my day as normal. Towards the end of my shift, I looked out the window again and saw him still standing there. I asked Mary if she had seen the guy before, and she confirmed that she did, but that he had just been sitting on the bench so she didn't see his face. She said that she hadn't seen him do anything else, and wasn't particularly worried about him, so I figured I would just drop it, thinking at most maybe he was just trying to play some stupid prank. It was the following day that I started getting a little worried. It was a Saturday, and I was off Sundays, so I picked up some items that Mary asked for from the store, or picked up takeout for her or small errands like that. When I got to the condos, I again saw the clown guy by the bench. But as I got out of the car, I noticed that he started walking towards me. Not knowing what to expect, I tucked my keys in between my fingers and made my way to the trunk to get the bags. When I closed it, the guy was then making eye contact with me and still walking towards me, I tried to ignore this and walked towards her door when this man let out the most blood-curdling scream that I had ever heard. It made me jump to the point that I also yelped and dropped one of the bags. I quickly tried grabbing the bag and ran towards the door as the guy stopped moving and just continued screaming right there in the middle of the parking lot. This time, instead of knocking first like I usually do, I immediately twisted the doorknob praying that it was unlocked. Mary must have known that I was going to be there soon and unlocked it. As I dashed in, I quickly closed the door, locked it, and then realized that Mary was on the couch looking a little startled as well. I explained to her as calmly as I could what I had witnessed. She seemed confused and suggested that I call security to look for them, or have them patrol the area. I didn't hesitate, and I called them explaining what had happened. After about 5 to 10 minutes, security knocked on the door to talk to me more about the situation. They told me that a few other residents had reported it too, but since he hadn't technically done anything yet, they couldn't do much but patrol the area. They also said that when they would start their rounds, he was seemingly nowhere to be found. It was like he knew when he was being looked for and managed to hide. The security guy that night was always really nice, and he was open with me, so he actually mentioned that he was concerned the guy might know their scheduled rounds, or could have even been on the same radio frequency, and just knew when to flee the area. He told me to be careful when I come and go, and to call for an escort if needed because he wasn't sure what this guy's intentions were. So, as I mentioned, I can usually handle my own, but that certainly did not make me feel any better about the situation, especially from Mary and her neighbors. When I left that night, I told her to keep her alert button and phone on her wherever she went, just to make sure she had some way of alerting someone. Lo and behold, when I got back to my car, he was back across the street, smiling and waving. This time I drove around to that side of the road, rolled down my window and asked him why he was there. Again, he just smiled and started his piercing screaming. So I drove away and called their main office again to tell them he was out there. It was pretty alarming knowing that he was around a bunch of seniors, some of them not being able to defend themselves. So I called Mary when I got home and even that Sunday throughout the day to make sure she was okay. Thankfully, she had no contact with the guy, but security never found him either. Unfortunately, when I went there on Monday, he was there again. This time, I quickly made my way to Mary's door without even looking at the guy and quickly went in, alerting security. Everything else went as normal until the PT nurse, Sarah, showed up. I forgot that she hadn't really encountered this guy until she was knocking at the door. I immediately went to open it and asked her if she saw the guy, but she said that she didn't. I was hopeful that security got them, but was also worried that he just ran off again. It wasn't until the next day that things took a bit of a turn for the worse. When I arrived on Tuesday, I didn't see this guy and was relieved that he had realized his pranks weren't funny anymore. However, today was going to be a half day for me, so after I got Mary settled in for a nap, I decided to wait in the living room until her daughter showed up. I thought I would clean up and dust a bit for her, so I went to open the curtains and there he was, staring right into the window. I screamed, jumping backwards, trying to catch my breath as my heart plummeted into my stomach. And the fact that he didn't budge within this time also snapped me back and caused me to get a hold of myself. If he was there to break in, why didn't he take off? Or even try to come in, or break the window, anything? So I approached the window to get a better look at his face. As I mentioned, he looked pale, but The wrinkles or creases in his face, I could tell he had caked on makeup, like a clown. There was some that was wiped off or faded around his mouth and eyes, almost dripping, like he'd been crying and drooling, maybe? Or maybe just spilling liquid from his mouth. He continued to smile as he slowly lifted a piece of paper that said "Smile" on it. At this point, I closed the curtain and double-checked to make sure the door was locked and went and grabbed my phone. I called security first when they asked me if he was still at the window. I went to check. Slowly, I pushed the curtain aside, but he was gone. I'm not sure if I was relieved or more worried about that. After getting off the phone with them, I called 911 as well. It was kind of trespassing, with them trying to look into the window, right? At least, that's what I told myself. They both showed up and were patrolling the area for a few hours at that point. They even went to the condos around the area asking if anyone else had contact with this guy. Several of them did, but it was never more than in the parking lot. I was the only one that experienced him screaming or even approaching the actual homes. From that day, they had a cop patrolling the area throughout the day, but the guy never showed back up. In fact, he was never seen again after that. I know this may sound wimpy, but it was truly a terrifying situation. And sometimes the less you know makes things even worse. I've talked to my friends and parents about this before, but no matter what, I still have no idea what this guy's motives were. If it was a prank, it was a terrible one. He could have easily caused someone to have a heart attack or worse. I also don't understand the suit or the briefcase. I still wonder what could have been in it, if anything, and why the sign with the word "smile" on it. And, of course, how the hell was he able to get away so quickly every single time, without anyone ever catching him? All I can say is, I'm glad he never came back, and that everyone there was okay. I just hope he didn't try to do it to anyone else. So that was a collection of 3 unexplained horror stories. Creepy unexplained stories. Everyone look at that. Could this be considered a true scary story collection of just 3 stories? Absolutely. But I chose to do these 3 stories together because they all kind of have an open ending. None of them have a real explanation for why they happened. Sure, the house could have been haunted, and the one could have been a glitch in the Matrix, and the clown guy could have just been crazy, but there's no finality to these stories. And as such, I think they work well together. 3 creepy, unexplained stories. And that's right. Hopefully you all enjoyed this collection. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button and let me know that you really... Let me know that you really, really enjoyed the stories. I hiccuped there. Let me know you enjoyed them with the thumbs up, subscribing if you're new to the channel, and leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts. This is the first video of this month to be on a Saturday. Next week, I'll probably do the same thing. I'm going to try this for a little bit. If it works out, great. If not, it will be moving back to Fridays. I want to do this for my schedule and give myself different days off. Patience is off on Fridays. So having Fridays off altogether would actually be kind of nice. Just to have a day together and day not to do much. So, yeah. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this, like I said. I already saw the stuff. Thumbs up, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. I got nothing else to say, so... yeah, no, still nothing else. I hope you all have a beautiful day. Hope you're having a fantastic weekend. And hope I see you next time. But until then, beautiful people, sleep well.